Hello, my friends. All right, chapter 16 in Stout-Hearted 7 is going to be in two sections again, because it's kind of a long one. So this is chapter 16, part 1. Chapter 16, part 1. A man coming up from the Willamette one day during the fall of 1847 stopped at the mission to tell Father that the farm machinery he had ordered 2 years ago had been brought to the Dalles. "How fortunate," Father exclaimed. "I hear there are 5,000 people coming across the plains, and they will all need supplies by the time they get here. The threshing machine and corn sheller will come in handy." John, who had returned from Lapwee a few weeks earlier, was preparing to take a pack train back there to bring potatoes and wheat from Mr. Spalling's farm. "Could you put off this long enough to bring home the machinery?" Father asked. "I have to ride to the Willamette to buy that Methodist property." "I guess I can," John replied. "And Perrin, would you be willing to take charge of the Dalles station this winter?" Perrin looked surprised but pleased. "Why, sure, Uncle Marcus, if you think I can do it." "Of course you can. Get ready and ride down with John. You'll need 2 wagons, one for each machine. I'll send an Indian along to help load the equipment and drive 1 wagon back." When Father returned from the valley, he told Mother he had bought that Methodist property for $600, a bargain, and he hoped the board would forward the money promptly. He had also found a new route between the Dalles and Umatilla. It was farther back from the Columbia than the old road, more direct and not plagued with shifting sand dunes. He intended to go right back to urge the immigrants to try it. "I'll take along a load of supplies," he announced. "The first wagons are already coming down from the mountains. You ride over with me, Mother. Perhaps we'll find a good teacher." "I'd like to have a lady teacher this time," Mother said. "The girls need someone to help them with embroidery and tatting and matters." "You may be right, but I think we need a man teacher too. And I need a cook, since Mrs. Spalling has asked to keep Mary Johnson all winter. Catherine, you come with me to help find these people." As they stood together beside the trail, watching the wagons rumble down the long grade of Immigrant Hill, Catherine could hardly remember when she had looked like these dusty, weary people only 3 years ago. She felt as if she had always lived in Wallapoo. At the camp, Mother met a charming young woman named Lorinda Bewley, who she decided was just the one to teach her girls. It was quite a job to induce her to spend the winter at the mission, but Mother could be very persuasive when she wanted to. And when at last she gained Lorinda's consent, she was triumphant. Father, too, succeeded in finding a man named Judge Saunders, who was willing to teach for a year so his 4 children could have the advantage of a school. In an exuberant mood, Father went a day's journey along the new road to point out the way to the lead wagons. But when he returned to Mother and Catherine at Umatilla, he looked like a different person. Worry lines furrowed his face. His deep sunken eyes were dark with foreboding. "Whatever is the matter?" Mother asked. "There were some sick children in those wagons. Measles. A lot more in the wagons behind, they told me. If this gets to our poor Indians." So measles are something that we don't have a lot today. We get a vaccine when we're a baby for it, but it can be very, very deadly. All the brightness left Mother's face, as if a curtain had been pulled over it. "We'd better hurry home and get ready," she explained to Catherine. "The Indians have a favorite remedy for illnesses. They steam themselves, then jump into the river. It helps some of their diseases, but for measles, it would mean death," because they have a really high fever. Overnight, the mission house, which had been so happy and full of hope, turned gloomy. Excuse me. Frank, who circled among the Indian lodges, brought word that Tom Hill, on whom Father had counted for help, was now telling the Cayuse his old story of what was going to happen to them and stirring their resentment against the white man, especially father, because he encouraged and helped other settlers. Another piece of bad news was that a Catholic priest had come to the Walla Walla area and was looking for a place to build a mission. The Indians, Frank said, had offered him the Wallapoo buildings as soon as they could drive Dr. Whitman away. The priests had refused their offer, but that did not change the fact that they had made it. Catherine could tell that both mother and father were alarmed, but they concealed their feelings enough to welcome Lorinda Bewley and the Saunders. Very soon, wagons full of sick children began to arrive. Since the mansion house had 4 rooms downstairs and 5 smaller ones upstairs, Mother was able to stow away the first comers by insisting that each family, even those with several children, occupy only 1 room. As more and more people came, they had to camp in their wagons and cook over outdoor fires. Father had only a few simple remedies for measles. Mostly, it was a matter of keeping the children warm and in bed, and after a few days, most of them recovered without bad after effects. This was not the case with the Indian children, who soon began to come down with the disease. Mother's prophecy was all too true, for in spite of the doctor's advanced warnings, they used the steam bath and cold plunge treatment. The wailing of the death chant became almost constant. However ill-advised the Indians' methods of treating measles might be, they all loved their children intensely, and as deaths mounted, their anger against the white man increased. Even the Sager children, kept inside the house, became aware of it. "I'm awfully scared," Elizabeth whispered at night. "So am I," Catherine whispered back. "I feel so sorry for the poor Indians. Suppose it was our Louise and Henrietta that died." "Oh no, Katie, don't think such a thing." The epidemic grew worse. Oh, we know about epidemics and pandemics, don't we? The epidemic grew worse. Chief Telkalot, who so far had been faithful to father, lost 3 sons in as many days and became a broken man. He could not conceal his thirst for vengeance. As October moved into November, everyone in the mission could feel the tension in the air. Tom Hill disappeared, but his place was immediately taken by an ugly fellow named Joe Lewis, who was also part Indian and bitter over the troubles of his people. He lacked Hill's pleasant manner and had been so disagreeable on the journey west that none of the immigrants would have him in their wagons. He arrived at the mission on foot, almost starved and without a shirt on his back. Although father, with his customary kindness, supplied him with clothes and food and offered him work, Joe Lewis proved so useless and mean that father told him to go on to the valley. He left, but in a few days was back, hanging around the Indian camp. Frank kept father informed of his actions. Lewis, he said, went much further than Tom Hill in trying to arouse the Indians. He told them father was poisoning them to get rid of them all. That is not true. He had heard the white men plotting it, and the Indians were not reluctant to believe him. They could see for themselves that white people were not dying, only the Indians. The mission was so gloomy and full of foreboding that nobody paid much attention when John returned with the new farm machinery that ordinarily would have carried father to heights of enthusiasm. John set in the pantry barrels of sugar and kegs of molasses he had brought, but mother had no time for fancy cooking. Supplies were going out so fast that John soon prepared to take a pack train to Lapwai for more. He and his Indian helpers were ready to start one morning when mother came out into the yard where Catherine and Elizabeth were seeing him off. Catherine thought she looked more worried than ever. "John, please don't leave me," she begged. Frank, Marianne, and Helen are all sick this morning. I'm sure it's measles. Father is worn out staying up so many nights at the Indian camp. I need you terribly. John drew her in his arms. Now, Mother, don't you worry. If you need me, of course I'll stay. My helpers can pack the train to Lapwai, and Mr. Spalding can help haul the supplies back. He is planning on bringing Eliza for school, Father told me. Thank you, John. For a moment, she rested in his arms, then hurried back into the house. I don't feel very well either, Elizabeth whispered to Catherine. Neither do I. My throat hurts. Before night, both were in bed, burning with fever, and soon John, Matilda, the Mason boys, everyone except Father and Mother was down with the measles. The sitting room and the kitchen were full of beds, each holding a sick child, tossing and turning, crying out for water or complaining of a headache. Father and Mother were here, there, and everywhere. If they slept, no one could tell when. And we're going to stop right there. Chapter 16, part 1. So everyone is getting the measles. They brought them back from the east. The difference between the white man and the Indian during this time is that the white people had been exposed to measles many, many, many times and had built up an immunity. And the white people's body, even though they were children and never had measles before, their body was able to fight it off. They were able to heal. But the Indians, because they had not had a lot of contact with white people, did not have an immunity for it. That means that their bodies, when they got the measles, reacted very different than the white people's, and they almost immediately died. And another thing that didn't help is that with the measles, they would get high fevers, and their bodies would be just burning with fever. And what they would do is they would steam them up and get them even hotter, and then they would throw them into the freezing cold water, and it would shock their bodies and cause them to die almost immediately because of the shock. So this was not going well, and everyone was having the measles. And now they have Joe Louis, who is in the Indian camps, who is trying to convince the Indians that Dr. Whitman is out to get them, which we know is not true. So the plot thickens, my friends. Remember, this is a true story. This really happened. These were real people. All right. Talk to you later. Bye.